I'll just share with you what have been the biggest takeaways and the biggest learning for me on the on this sort of transition, this sort of very sort of different world of the planted community tank versus the keeping big predator beasts in a very large aquarium. I mean, naturally there are some similarities. I mean, you want good water quality. You want clean water. You want, I mean, you want water turnover. There are things that are, of course, universal, and but they part ways very quickly in similarities. But one difference that I had to immediately adjust to was how I think about lighting. With the African cichlids, the lighting situation is very different. As a matter of fact, the only time you really see this tank this lit behind me is when I'm filming. Normally, the tank only has one light strip, the one in the very front on. The two in the back are off, and the one in the front is down to about 30%. It's controlled with an app. It's an RGB app controlled light, and I run it at about 30%. And so I also run it on a timer, as part of the app. It's not on for that long. It's on for several hours in the morning and several hours at night. Now, the reason I do that with large, with African cichlids, with predators, is because it seems that they calm down when things are a little bit dim, and so it kind of keeps them kind of mellow. They kind of sleep and hibernate or do their thing, right? And now, that's not to say that there isn't aggression in the dark, and I have lost cichlids because of a ambush in the dark that occurred. As a matter of fact, that Taiwan reef that is now in the 55 gallon, I've moved it to the 55 gallon, was probably assaulted in the dark, because when there is light and when I'm around, possibly because they're distracted by my presence and think there's going to be food, but when I'm around, nobody was picking on that fish. So it may have been an in the dark ambush that got him. But the lighting is very limited. On the other hand, with the planted community tank, lighting is something that you dial in to the point where the plants are getting enough light, but there isn't so much light that you're getting algae on the glass, on the plants, on the wood, on the rocks. So you're monitoring, you're moving the light around, you're playing with the intensity. And I would say that the planted aquarium has the lights on at about 70% for about twice the amount of time that the African cichlid tank has, and it's still being tweaked. It's still being tweaked. Mostly in an effort to control both black algae and the hard green algae that can grow on the glass. So it's a little bit better now. I've dialed it back a bit. I've lowered the intensity a little bit, and it looks like the black algae is starting to kind of roll back a little bit. The plecos are getting up on it and munching it a little bit, I've noticed. So lighting a planted community, there's a lot more to it than just lighting a cichlid tank and deciding, okay, I want it lit 2 hours in the morning and 4 hours at night, and that's it, it's over. Whereas with the planted tank, there's an ongoing tweak that's going on and a close monitoring of the plants and the glass and the algae until you get it right. And of course, I mean, I like full spectrum lights in general. I think the best way to see the beauty of our fish is with sunlight. And the closest thing to that is a full spectrum light. So I usually use full spectrum on all my tanks, but certainly in a planted tank, you must have a full spectrum. You have to have sunlight conditions, plant type conditions, which is why I have the Aquarium Co-op, that easy LED light from Aquarium Co-op on the 55, the only tank that has a plant specific light on it. So lighting and thinking, the way you think about light is very, very different. And of course, there's also the idea of decor. With a planted community tank, you have to have something that is going to be conducive to plants. This is why I added the special plant substrate on the outsides of the 55 gallons, so I could put the rooted plants into that section of the tank, and then the long strips of driftwood to support plants that can be out of the substrate, like your Java fern and your Anubias. So again, the considerations about substrate are going to be very, very different from the considerations of or thoughts about substrate in a cichlid tank. A cichlid tank, what do you want? They sift a lot. So you want something that is more like sand, not super fine because you might get stuff pulled up into your filters, but fine enough so they can pick it up and spit it out and not really agitate their gills or their lips. And if you're like me, you want to help with buffering and with mineralization of the water by adding things like aragonite and crushed coral in an African cichlid tank. Whereas, planted community tank is really just plant-friendly substrate and white sand. What is called, I think it's called Carib Sea Naturals. I think it's called Naturals, white sand. So substrate, very, very different thought process. Whereas with an African cichlid tank, it's helping with buffering. It is part of your water chemistry. Whereas in the planted tank, you really have a neutral substrate, and that is going to be helping. If it helps anything, it helps in the area of plants. Now that being said, you probably would not hurt things if you threw a handful of crushed coral in your planted community tank, because calcium and magnesium never hurts. Especially if you have snails or shrimp or anything that is creating a shell type of situation. Other things that jump out in the differences is really water, how you treat your water. Naturally, in both cases, you want to neutralize chloramine, things of that nature. You certainly want zero ammonia, zero nitrite in both situations. But with the Malawis, I use the Malawi lake salt. I add trace minerals, and I have found that both in the area of health and color, it really does tend to help, I think. Now, you might think I'm throwing money down the toilet, but I've always done it. I've always had fish that people would comment and go, wow, how does that fish look like he's in breeding dress? You have no females in that tank. I think a lot of it is just having water that is providing the fish with a wide assortment of minerals. They get some minerals from their food, but a lot of the minerals are taken in through the body of the fish. And again, a handful of crushed coral in a planted community is not gonna hurt at all. But also, of course, in the planted community, I'm adding fertilizers like your Easy Green, right? Your Easy Green pump, and I've got root tabs in there. If I put root tabs in an African cichlid tank, they would be dug up and swallowed within probably 30 seconds. So I'd have choking cichlids. But you don't need it, of course, because all I have in here are phony, fake plants. As a piece of decor. So let's talk a little bit about water, about the maintenance of the aquarium. In my mind, the taking care of a large aquarium is actually very easy, especially if you have a sump and if you have a pre-filter on a canister like I have. I touch my filters, the sump, maybe once a year, and every 9 months on the canister. The sump has what are called filter socks. A filter sock works as a pre-filter. And the FX6 has a sponge, again from Aquarium Co-op, over the intake that serves as a pre-filter. And I've tested it. I've opened up the canister several times, and it takes about 9 months. So what do I do with this tank? I do a very light raking of the substrate, very light substrate raking. Every other week, every 2 or 3 weeks, I maybe turn the rocks, maybe rinse out the pre-filter. I swap out socks, maybe once every 7 to 9 days. I swap out the pre-filter sock, and I do a water change, maybe 20–30% water change. That's the extent of ongoing maintenance on the big 300-gallon behind me. The 55-gallon, I do water changes, but I've got to do usually up until now, and I hope it gets better, but I have to do a razor blade scrape to get the hard green algae off of the glass. I have to trim and clean off plant surfaces that are showing too much algae. And maybe rub a little bit of the algae off of the rocks. Even though the rocks in that 55 are getting green algae, I don't mind green algae. I don't mind the look of it. I might just let it go. I've got to clean up any plants that are floating. I have to clean up and trim the Sprite. And of course, I have to work on the hang-on back filter that's in there. And that's a Marineland 400. And I just simply rinse some of the sponges. I have reusable sponges in the Marineland hang-on back that I simply pull out, rinse under tap water, and put back in. So, all things considered, it is a longer process only because of the sheer volume of the water. The longer process to service the 300, but a much faster, a much easier process than servicing the planted 55-gallon community tank. So, maintenance. Now, let's talk about real quickly. Let's touch on feeding. With the planted cichlid tank, I'm sorry, with the planted community tank. Boy, I'd love to see a planted cichlid tank. I tried it once. It cost me a lot of money. It didn't work. With the planted community tank, I've got a variety of things going on. I put some crushed community, some of the community crave from Extreme. I crush up a little bit of that. I drop some, I think they're Aquarium shrimp pellets, so that my bottom feeders, the cories, the plecos, the whiptail, even though the other fish pick them up and run around with them, but I drop some of those in there. I drop some algae wafers in there. So, and occasionally I'll give them some bloodworms, and sometimes some live brine shrimp. So the feeding is a little bit more complicated. Feeding of the African cichlids. I have a mix of food that includes hikari and Dinachi and extreme pellets and Piscean energetics. Sometimes there's a little Northfin in there. There's a lot of just a big mix that I make. And there's also some Granu Green from Sarah. They get a little bit of veggie in there to kind of keep the intestines cleared out. And I throw them in there. And they eat like pigs. I mean, I feed them a lot, but it's gone in 15 seconds, maybe 30, all gone. And it's a lot of food. Very expensive. It's all high-end food. And they go through a lot of it. Whereas the planted tanks don't quite go through so much. A pinch goes a long way with these guys. The main concern is that everybody gets a chance to eat, like your neons stay near the bottom. The Buenos Aires tetras are very aggressive eaters. The rasboras, the red serpas, the runny noses, very sort of shy eaters. You just got to make sure some stuff is sinking, or else everybody's not going to get to it. The same thing with the African cichlids. You've got to feed them on different sides of the tank. As I mentioned one time in a YouTube short, you've got to hit far ends of the tank while you're feeding, or else the less dominant fish are not going to get to the food. So I'll feed way on one side, let all the fish migrate over there, and then I'll feed on the other side. And the less dominant fish have learned to hang back, and because they know some food is coming to that side. So now, in the area of cost, I also feed frozen krill to the large African cichlids, and frozen krill is expensive. I mean, a couple sheets about this big, about a quarter-inch thick, a sheet of it, smaller than a piece of paper, is going to cost you about $22, $23. So it is not cheap. So in some ways, the predator tanks are easier in several respects. Now let's talk about the enjoyment level, and this is a whole different topic, because I enjoy them both for different reasons. I love the interaction of the larger fish going after your finger, splashing you when they feed. I think it's hilarious. Some people don't like it. Maybe they find it annoying. I think it's funny. Latching onto your finger. I mean, as long as they don't have well-developed teeth, it's for me, it's just a lot of fun feeding the fish and watching how brave they are in constantly going after you. I mean, there's no shyness here. If I do that to my planted tank, I mean, they practically give themselves concussions banging against the back wall of the tank, because they're so skittish. Whereas the African cichlids are like, hey man, what's happening? What you got? You got something for me? They're kind of like my dogs, It's like, hey, what's up, man? And and I like that. I like that a lot. Now, with that comes a certain level of aggression. My tank is, relatively speaking, and compared to some of the stuff I've been through in the past, and at least what they're showing me, they might have snuck one in on me with that Taiwan reef, but I'm not seeing a tremendous amount of aggression. After a water change, the livingstoni or the Malawi trout might get a little fired up and corral the fish a little bit. But for the most part, from time to time, there is aggression, and that can be annoying. Whereas if you want a complete sort of Zen moment, you sit in front of the planted community tank. Everybody is just kind of cruising around. Beautiful greens, the beautiful wood, the color of wood, the nature of it, the floating sprite, little snail goes cruising by. It's very calming, very relaxing, and I understand and I get it why some folks have gone from aggressive fish to a planted community, because it's a different kind of enjoyment. What do you find more enjoyable? the big, boisterous, coming at you, aggressive cichlids? Or do you like the peaceful, sort of floating around, and the amount of green and natural wood colors that you can get in a planted community? What do you find more satisfying? I'd love to hear it. There's a level of enjoyment that's different for each one for different reasons. And I like them and enjoy the heck out of them. And sometimes I'll come into the fish room and I'll just point my chair at the planted tank. And sometimes I'll turn around and just watch the Africans or watch the South Americans. And or roll my chair over and just check out the live bears, they're just a hoot. They never stop. They're always moving. The males are just relentless. There's like Viagra in the food or something. And all the fry. There's just tons of fry that somehow, I guess I keep them well fed enough so that they don't eat all the fry. I think some have gotten eaten. So any comments that you have about this topic, I'd love to hear it. Comment frequently and comment hard, because apparently, like I mentioned in that video, the new algorithm is recommending videos based on the interaction and comments. And so, yeah, comment your brains out, and be sure to give it a thumbs up and a like and all that other good stuff. And so let's go ahead and end off on this topic.